So, good evening, everyone, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and students. Welcome to the scientific evening of tonight of the University of Nova Gorica. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to give the warmest welcome to and introduce today's guest speaker, Professor Xavier Greff. Let me say that our university, and in particular teachers, researchers and students of the doctoral program in heritage studies, had the privilege to work with Professor Greff since the establishment of the ETSAEH at CACT program in 2005. At that time, our course was one of the initiators of the studies attempting to merge economics with architecture, engineering, and landscape. Since then, through many joint teaching, research projects, and mentorship activities, we have learned and explored many ways on why and how heritage and culture can be crucial factors for social and economic innovation. It is important to underscore that Professor Greff's work as trainer and mentor has been critical in shaping the careers of young researchers, including me, by reconsidering and redefining the importance of culture, bringing it back to the front line of territorial development through sustainability. So let me take this occasion to thank Professor Greff for his precious contribution in shaping and innovating our doctoral course. It is worth summarizing his career that started at University of Paris, Paris-La Sorbonne, where he currently holds the title of Emeritus Professor of Economics and manages the doctoral program in Economics of Arts. He is also Associate Professor at the Graduate Research Institute for Policy Studies in Tokyo. Before, he held a number of professorships around the world, and in particular at UCLA, Los Angeles, Paris, Trèves, in Alger. He is member of the scientific board of Le Louvre in Paris. For many years, he worked with the French administration when he was Director of New Technologies in the Department of National Education, Rector of the Academy of Orléans-Tours, Director of Training and Apprenticeship in the Department of Labor and Employment, Rector of the Academy of Poitiers. He has published an enormous number of publications, and I will just mention the most recent one, Arts and Artists from an Economic Perspective, French Cultural Policy, Gestión des Empresas Creativas, Arte et Mercado, La Trace et l'Horizon, les mises en scène du patrimoine culturel, Culture, Creativity and City, o Economia Artistica Creativa, The Artist Enterprise in a Digital Age, and Arts et Argent. I do not want to take Professor's podium, so I kindly invite him to address his lectures. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, good evening. Let me first say that I am very happy to be there, and thank you for your welcome and your invitation. It's a pleasure to work with you since 2005. I did not remember, I knew it was a long time ago, but time is very short, in fact. Therefore, it was never a pain to do that. And they asked me to speak to you tonight about the relationship between culture and economics. It's not a very easy subject. I am very conscious of that. Therefore, I will not try to be too long and to let as much time as possible for the discussion. But it is a very relevant subject today all over the world, not only in European countries for very specific reasons, but you find the same issues in Asia a lot, in China, for example, when they say that they want to create 5,000 museums in the next 10 years, which is a big program, naturally. You find that in Oceania, because it's a main resource, the music and the folklore of these communities is very well recognized all over the world. You find that in all the parts of the world. And therefore, not only we see the facts, but we interpret them. And here start the discussion. Because for some people, and for some economists, but not only economists, for politicians too, they consider that culture can be a driver for the economic development. In that sense, that the development of museums, the development of movie industry, of audiovisual, of series, and so on and so forth, can be a source of growth, bringing new jobs and what we call in our jargon added value to the national product. But in the other sense, we see many failures. And I just want to give you two examples of this success and these failures. When somebody that you know probably, Lucas, the famous director of Star Wars, sold this company to Disney, he sold this company for $4 billion. 4 billion for Lucas only. It was not for the other people, it was for one man, after 10 years of creating the series of Star Wars. And the new ones are not done anymore by Lucas, he's still advisor, but they are done by Disney, as probably you know. But if I take, for example, the case of Europe, we know that we have approximately 35,000 museums. The data are not very precise because it's always very difficult to design exactly what is a museum. But according to the ICOMOS, we are more or less with 35,000 museums. And almost 200 die every year. The small ones, naturally, not the biggest one. Not the Guggenheim, not the Louvre, no, not the National Gallery. But not only we have 200 or 300 that die every year, but we know that you have approximately 20% of these data, it means almost 7,000, that are in a situation of euthanasia, because there is no more money, and they are closed more and more. They are closed the months that are not the summer months, and after they are closed all the months, and so on and so forth. And naturally, you can imagine that the essence of a museum, it means the conservation, is no more existing. Therefore, we have this challenge. And before starting and explaining what I am going to try to show to you, I would like to make two remarks. The first one, maybe it's a semantic remarks. Culture it's something very wide. Culture, it's the set of values that we have and that inspire our behaviors, our actions, and so on and so forth. And many things contribute to culture. The education, naturally, is fundamental. The heritage, but the heritage is already the arts, more or less. The religion sometimes, but the arts too. And the arts have a very, very specific and seminal role in producing culture, because it is the activity that is fundamentally organized to represent and design some values, and the values that inspire, in a sense, our way of life. Therefore, I could use the word artistic activities here, because I am not going to speak to you about religion or about education. We can come back if you want on through the discussion. But when we say culture, and it is a very frequent overlapping, you know, in the literature and the scientific literature too. When we say culture, we mainly say arts. Arts in a wide sense. It means that by arts, I start with naturally the traditional core of the arts, the visual arts, and after you have the live arts, the cultural industries, and today, I will come back on that point later on, the creative industries. Okay. There is a second point that I want to stress in order for you to understand the difficulty of the problem. It is the fundamental difference between, I take voluntarily the word, aesthetics and economics. A very curious thing that is never quoted, I have to say, you will not find that very frequently, it is that these two scientific fields and fields of research have almost appeared in the same period of time. at the end of the 18th century, mainly in Europe at that time after it. But in other countries, aesthetic existed, but under other classification, if I can think like that. But it is interesting to remember this birth of the two connected fields of research. Why? Because the principle of aesthetics, it was to understand the value of something exceptional, something unique. The famous I don't know what of Kant, for example. And the principle of economics, it is exactly the opposite. It is to merge all our feelings, all our values, our subjective values, in a common denominator, the money, more or less. Therefore, the two fields are almost, I don't know if I can say orthogonal. It means they are not at all, they take two very different directions. And today, when we are looking very precisely at the recommendations, for example, how to manage a museum, how to benefit from a festival, how to create a cultural product like wine, for example, or something else, here we have this tension between the exceptional from one side, which is very well represented by the theory of the aesthetics, and the common judgment from the other side, which is very well represented by the fact that on the market, I don't want to know your feelings, I just want to know what you are going to pay for that. And you don't want maybe to know the feeling of the producer. This is a little different, but you want to know what he's asking for you in terms of money. Therefore, this is very important to understand that there will be always between the economist and the people of the world, I say the world voluntarily, of arts, I don't say an opposition, but a difficulty, because they have not at all, they don't start with the same references. But after, naturally, they have to live together. And this is when the story starts. Okay. I would like to give you the 3 steps of this presentation. In the first time, I would like to explain to you, it's a little kind of genesis of history, but it is very important, why in Europe we have started with the idea that cultural activities or artistic activities matter for economic growth and development, and why today we have arrived at a conclusion according to which we should invest in culture to make development more sustainable. This is the idea. And after I will come on the 2 other steps, the second step will be to explain to you what we see at the world level, the difference between the global cultural flows and the local cultural flows. And the third and final step will be to know how we connect these flows through what we call the very famous expression today in our field of research, the creative placemaking or the creative economy making, and naturally to end the role of the local governments. Okay, let's start first with the very important evolution of the debate. Let me tell you first, but I don't want to stay too long on that because I have no time and it will be too much academic, that the economists never spoke about culture until these recent years. Well, these recent 50 years, significant. Okay. There was some study on the role of economics on culture, on the link between culture and economics, but it was mainly done by sociologists. And the best example was naturally Max Weber, because Max Weber did this very famous analysis, not only on the Protestantism, on many religions. He did this study to show how the religion, which is the source of culture, can have an effect on the economic development. But the economics, they did not speak. Even our father, if I can speak like that, Adam Smith, because it is considered as the father of the economists, he spoke a little about culture, and he said something very, very interesting that is forgotten now. He was asking, why do the artists try to be artists when they know that probably they will not sell their pieces of art, or they will not sell well their pieces of art. And he said, it is because the arts, it's not like a market, it is like a lottery. It means that you like to play, in a sense, or maybe you like what you do enough to take the risk of not selling it. And he said something very interesting, because it explained a lot of things today in Europe after. He says, when you make a lottery, if you want to win, you don't take only one ticket. You try to make a lot of tickets, and to buy a lot of tickets, excuse me. And then he said, then the artist will try to make a lot of pieces of art, even if they don't sell them. And he used that interpretation to explain why many artists could not survive. It was at that time, and this analysis stays a little. But it was exceptions. What happens, what was important, it was in the second part of the 20th century. Why? Because many traditional industries disappeared. And to understand better this case, you have this all over Europe, but probably the best example is the United Kingdom. Many traditional industries disappeared. Shipyards, steel industry, coal mining, so on and so forth. And then many cities were despaired. Remember that, for example, Manchester, that is known today as a very important city and very buoyant city in Europe, has a rate of unemployment of almost 30% at that time. And at that time, there was a movement, not only in the UK, but mainly in UK, to consider that if some traditional industries disappear, we have to try something else. We have to try to valorize, to create a market, starting from some resources that you have. And what are the resources that everybody has? It is the heritage. I can say the artistic creation, but at that time it was more the heritage. And if I come back on the example of Manchester, for example, the first investment that the city of Manchester did, because they had no any opportunity of investment, they had some money, but there was no project, there was no any project, it was to rehabilitate the old railway station. It was the first investment of the new age of Manchester. Okay. And at that time, many people started to think that you have always one resource, whatever the territory, whatever the city, whatever the rural space, it is cultural heritage. It can be a material, tangible heritage, monuments, landscape, but landscape is very difficult because landscape, if you want to change the landscape, it takes a lot of time and therefore it escapes a little the prospects of the traditional economic analysis and moreover the financial analysis. Or it can be intangible, the music, at that time not so much the gastronomy, but the music, the folklore, the dance, and so on. Okay. And this movement developed a lot, and naturally, it exploits another link. It is the link between culture and creation and arts, between between heritage and arts, between heritage and art. Because you create starting partly from the heritage, and as soon as this is created, it becomes a part of the heritage for the future. Therefore, we had a very big confidence in this trend. And many people, maybe you know the name, but I don't know, I don't want to make too much academic presentation. Many people wrote on this poem. But at the same time, other people say, okay, it's very, very, very good, but we see that it's not that easy. And we see that managing, for example, a theater is not so easy. Even producing a movie at that time is not so fruitful. Then in the same time, some economists say, oh, culture can be a good place for the development, but in the same time, other people say, no, it's very risky. And two very big interpretations appeared at that time, the first one and the second one. I take in this order. The first one is very well known, but I will not explain too much because first it's not so evident and it has not so much demonstrated, even if it has played a very political role. It is what we call the cost disease of the artistic production. And the second one will be the high degree of uncertainty of the artistic production. I will take the two, one after the other. Okay, the cost disease, it was a thesis that was, both appeared in the US, the cost disease was a thesis which was done by a very famous American economist, William Baumol, maybe some of you know. And he says very shortly, to give you an example, to be very short, you are the director of the automobile company. And you are the director of the theater in front of the automobile company. Okay, you have a starting price, one price for the automobile and one price for the entrance in the theater. Okay, 1 year after, in the automobile company, you have what we call productivity gains. It means that you can make a better division of labor. You can reduce the quantity of labor. Maybe you can save a lot of materials because we have what we call economies of scale. Maybe you can understand that intuitively. And then at the end of the year, you can either use this margin that appears, either to pay better the wages, or to reduce the price for the consumers and attract more consumers, or to pay the dividends for the shareholders. Okay. But you are in the theater, you cannot make productivity gains. If you have to play, you have to make to give a performance with 10 actors or 20 musicians or 15 dancers, you have to do always, you have to make always the same thing, more or less with the same time and with the same number of people and the same results. Therefore, you don't make any productivity gains. It means that you cannot increase the wage of the artist, or you cannot reduce the cost for attracting new consumers. I don't speak about the dividends for the theater because it would be a little anxious. Okay. Then it means that not maybe the first year, but 1 year after the other, you have a kind of discrepancy between the future of the automobile industry and the future of the artistic activities. And probably the cost relatively, you have always to make a comparison. This is a difficulty in economics. We never speak in absolute terms. We have always to make a comparison and arbitrage. Therefore, it means that from years to years, your cost will be higher, and probably the salary of the artist will be much lower than the salaries of the automobile workers, and so on and so forth. Then he says, the only solution would be to correct that, and there are two things to correct. The first one is what everybody does today, it is to reduce the number of actors. Or the number of musicians, it's more difficult. But you know, when you see adaptation in a literary program, it's always very likely you can think that it has an advantage. It will reduce the number of actors. You know, the Shakespeare drama that took 6 hours with 100 people. No, it's 2 hours between 6 and 8 with 10 people. Well, in Paris, it's like that anyway. I don't know in Slovenia, but okay. Then you have this, he said, okay, there is an economic deficit, but maybe you can fight against the economic deficit by an aesthetic deficit. You reduce the quality of the play, in a sense. Or you can do something else. You can ask to somebody to pay. And you are going to ask to the government to subsidize. And since the situation is more and more difficult, you have to be subsidized more and more. And then we have had, at that time, and it's still very active in some countries, not everywhere, but if you look at the report of the European Union, you will find that on many pages. You have the idea according to which the artistic sector may create jobs, maybe, may contribute to the GDP, the famous GDP, the product, national product, but only if there are subsidies, which is a problem, at least for the public finance and for the governments. Okay. This thesis, I have to tell you, is not so well verified today, and even the person that has formulated this thesis say that it should not be taken so much. But anyway, it shows that it is not that evident to manage in a sustainable way artistic activities. But there was another interpretation by another economist, very well known, much less known, but very, I think very important, Keynes. And he said the problem, and I want just to explain to you that because it will shorten the presentation after. The problem of the cultural good, it is that there is a very high degree of uncertainty. In economics, normally, when you buy a computer, for example, well, it's not that frequent, but if you buy a computer, you know before what you are going to buy. You have the information, you have the mouth to hear of the other people that have this kind of equipment. You have a lot of description of the performances of the device and so on. Then the main argument will be the price, more exactly, the relationship between the quality and the price. Okay. And we call this kind of goods an information good because it relies mainly on the information. You have the information, and then the price will be determined. If I go to the theater, it will be a little different. Because even if I know the play, even if I know the actors, I don't know this evening what I will find, or this morning, this day, what I will find. I will make an experience. The word experience is fundamental here because it will make a bridge between economics and aesthetics after. I will make an experience. But I don't know the value before making this experience. After attending the performance or after looking at the movie, I will know if I am happy or not, if it has some value for me or not. But before, I cannot know. There is a price, but I don't know the quality. Then, Richard can say, the specificity of the culture, of the artistic goods, it is that you don't know how to decide. Your behavior, the behavior of the consumer, is uncertain. If I am Apple, and if I sell this computer, 500 euros, which is not the case, I know that I will sell a lot. But if I sell these 2,500 euros, I know that I will not sell this kind of computers. But at the theater, you don't know, because the consumer, if the place for entering is 30 or 40 or 50 euro, I don't know, you don't know what is the value. We will know after. And he said, the uncertainty of the consumer transforms itself in an uncertainty for the producer. If the consumer doesn't know, the producer cannot know how many consumers will attend. And then it creates a very big risk on the artistic production. Therefore, these two interpretations explain, excuse me, because I speak too much. Yeah, these two interpretations explain why culture, not only why culture is important, but mainly why they face a lot of difficulties, and why, which is still a very common idea in many countries in Europe, less in America, but a little too. not at all in Asia, why the governments are mobilized to sustain this sector. Okay. When we do that, we can say, okay, you tell me, you told us it may be important. What is the importance? We know that inside the countries, it's approximately between 2 and 2.5% in the European countries in terms of employment and in of jobs and in terms of product. Well, I don't want to insist too much on that, but I put a statistic after you, but it's difficult to read. Oh, excuse me. Here, but if you want, you will find it. You can look. It's a summary, recent summary of the European Union about the share of the employment on the product. Okay. I have to tell you that since 20 years, I started with the end of the 20th century. Now I am in the 21st century. Things have relatively changed and significantly changed. It has changed first because the economic theory has changed first. It's a long movement, but if you want in the discussion, I can come back. Traditionally, when the economists explain the development of an area, of a territory, of a country, of a region of the world, they say, for developing, you have to value your own resources for the others. It means that, for example, you have to create a product that you can sell out of your territory. And since you create this product and you sell it, you can import the product that you don't have, but that you need. It's what we call the exogenous growth theory. It's a very famous theory, you know. The only one of the big economists who didn't do that, it's Marx, because he considered it you have to take the value on the worker, but it's a different approach. Okay. Today, the economists have changed a lot, looking at the effects of education on creativity, on the economy. And they say there is another foundation for the growth and the development. It is to better use our own resources. What does it mean? It means that, for example, before, when I told you we create museums, we have theaters, we have festivals, it was to attract the tourists, the visitors. And at that time, we justified the importance of the culture, not so much by the economic importance of the culture, not so much by the benefits for the local inhabitants, but by the fact that you attract the tourists and that the tourists bring their money. Therefore, tourism is a kind of exportation. The only difference with the traditional exportation, it is that it is the consumer that moves, it's not the product that moves. Okay. And then they said, but if we can valorize our human resources that exist on the territory by making them more creative, by having better connection between local people, and not only local people, but naturally with other people too, naturally, it's not exclusive, we can create a very, very endogenous growth approach. It means that here, we need not to know what is important to sell outside, we have to know what is important to do inside. And yes. And then, at that time, we considered that what was very important, it was to make people more and more creative. Education was naturally a very, very big driver, since this is not new in a sense. But at that time, arts were considered more and more as a driver for that. For example, if I take a museum, a museum can welcome children to visit the museum, and the curator can expect only that they leave the soonest possible, but they come back with their parents or their grandparents. It's a very famous approach of the management of the museums. But it's not very useful, this. But you can make the visit of the museum for the young people by organizing on the experience of using some objects, on making the apprenticeship of the creation of an object. Why does this object has been created? In which context? For which reason? And so on and so forth. And then you make a kind of acclimatation of the creativeness inside these people. You make the young, you expect, it's your hope, you make them more project-oriented and more active in the search of the solution. And this approach becomes more and more important because it was both in connection with the development of economic theory, but it was too in connection with what happens in many cultural places. Because when you have one success for a theater, for a movie, etc., you have, there is a very famous sentence in Hollywood, you have 9 failures. Not all the museum can live on the tourists. You have not enough tourists for the museum. But you have users, you have potential users of the museum, and these potential users of the museum can be the local population as far as you organize the visit of the museum, the use of the museum in that direction. And then we have a very, very important movement that we can call from arts to creativity. You know, when the word creativity is used everywhere today, it's used everywhere. And there is another debate, by the way, but if you want in the question between artistic creativity and scientific creativity, but I don't want to open it right now. It is everywhere. And naturally, when we try to delineate what are the creative industry, what are the creative sectors, many countries have its own system. There was a very famous definition at the beginning in the UK, and UK played a big role at that time, but now this definition is completely drawn out. It's not a problem. But when you look at, when you join creativity and art, you mean essentially that art is a driver for creativity, and creativity is a driver for economy. This does not suppress the first interpretation. Arts can attract people from outside, but it gives, at the core of the process, another interpretation. When we do that, this is very important. I take the example of the young people. You can tell me, yes, but you're very nice. Well, very nice. It's very nice to tell these things. But what about the aesthetic value, the famous aesthetic value? What about the emotion? What about the emotional experience of all these words that are used very rightly to try to describe what is an artistic experience? No, you tell us, okay, we can use arts to make the young people better understand what is a creative process. I can take the same example in the hospital, well, not exactly the same, but another example in the hospitals. I can say, in many places in Europe today, in order to postpone Alzheimer's disease, you make aging people dance, reading, playing, and things like that. This is very important. Therefore, we see that we had from one side the aesthetic value, the traditional aesthetic value, which stay at the core of the process, but we have what we call the instrumental benefits of arts and culture. And these instrumental benefits are today the main shop of the economist, in a sense. In that sense that they say, okay, you better well, you all know the Florida thesis. Well, you don't know, but today we don't speak anymore on this thesis because it has been very controversial and very not confirmed from the econometrical point of view. But he said, okay, if you put very big museum, very big café-concert, very big opera in a city, all the clever people will come. This is an instrumental use of the culture. It's not an aesthetic use of the culture. It's, okay. Therefore, we have all these things, but it has an interest. It shows that we should not speak of the artistic sector. We can speak of the artistic sector as the source of the activities. But the activities may appear all over the society. There is no more only a specific sector for the artistic consumption. Not only one, anyway. Okay, I shall come back because I have to go there. Okay, finally, just here, when you remember the first one, I told you that the share was approximately, when I took this approach at that time, it was between the 60s and the 2000 approximately, we said that the share of the artistic activities was between 2 and 2.5% in average. And now, the share of the artistic activities, when we consider this extension on behalf of creativeness, it is between 5 to 10%. And the champion here is the United States and the statistic. But it's very curious. But it's not. It could be predicted because they have very strong cultural industries and very buoyant performing arts and very big museum and so on. But they have two. In the US, they account the people who sing in the temples or in the churches on Sunday as artists. Therefore, it makes a lot of people too, even if you try to reduce a little the number, because if you sing 2 hours a week, it's not enough. But you have very big data. And, okay, I can come back on that, but I don't want, because I have many things to tell you. And oh my God. Okay. No, I have to go fast. Excuse me, I have not too much time. 5 minutes? Okay. It's terrible. I am sorry. Okay, the second point was to... No, I know I have 5 minutes. I will take 10 because... the second thing I want to tell you is I explained to you what are the roots of the debates. Now, I want to tell you, what do we see? We see that when we look about culture or arts, we have flows that are global and flows that are local. Okay. The flows that are global, and they play a very big role. It is, for example, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, Live Nation. Live Nation plays a role here. It's a big organizer of performing arts. I don't know if they are in Slovenia or not. These are those who have invented a pass that cost approximately €750 a year, and you can go everywhere in the world to see their performance with this pass. It gives you an idea of the way culture is working, and mainly with young people. Well, young people that have money, naturally, because not always. Okay. These cultural flows, first, don't believe they are so strong. They are very important. Netflix is about now more than, I don't remember the number exactly, they are more than 600 million or something like that of viewers. But they are very indebted, like Amazon, for example. They are indebted. They have 1 billion of debt for Netflix. Therefore, it gives you an idea that it's not because you are big that you cannot fail. The famous expression, too big to fail, it's finished. Okay. And these, naturally, I could have added here, I don't want to do that because it's a little controversial, Guggenheim, for example, because Guggenheim has created franchises all over the world, more or less successful, because the vast majority of them have been unsuccessful, but it shows that they try to be really all over the world. Okay. These are the global flows. Okay, I am obliged to go fast, but But it's written. I can send you. Well, I am writing the text in English. I can send it to you. It's a report. Okay. In front of these very global flows, that can be interpreted as backed by the leisure activities. You know, probably you make an experience when you look at Netflix, but probably you spend your leisure time, and you spend more your leisure time that you make really an experience that makes you creative. But it's up to everybody to make its own conclusion. Okay. The local cultural flows, it's the flows that are more at the local level, naturally. And usually, these flows are more related to the experience. They try to make people, starting from an emotion, having an experience, connecting with the others, creating a community, and so on and so forth. The famous expression of the catharsis of the Greeks is there. It's underlying. We can find new, very modern expression, but it is like that. And the problem of this flow, by opposition to the first one that I told you before, it is that they are very fragile, because very often they are undertaken by a vast majority of small enterprise. If I have time, I can give you the precise data. And these small enterprise, we see that they are very turbulent. It means that they appear for one project, and sometimes they disappear as soon as the project is done. Sometimes they can go from 1 to 2 to 3 projects. It may happen, but the proportion is very low. Within time, and we can explain that if you want. Okay. And naturally, this turbulence of the small cultural enterprise creates a turbulence for the artist. This is not new, because you know that in the 19th century, we were speaking about the Bohemians, about the Romantic, which was not very, very good, because at that time, the Romantic and the Bohemians were coming from families that very often had some resources. Therefore, if you are in history of arts, you know that probably much better than me, but today, we know that they are usually under-remunerated. And we have very precise statistics at the world level. We know that in average, the artists of the performing arts, to take just this one, the visual artist is very difficult the visibility of the visual artist is much more difficult to have. But for the performing arts, because they are in enterprise, they are paid 80% of the average remuneration in their respective countries. We do that very easily. We say, okay, I take an artist that has made 3 years of study. I take, an economist that has made 3 years of studies, and I compare the wage 10 years after, and I see what is this. Well, it's economic cooking. Don't worry about that. It's not so difficult. Today, we see that, in fact, the situation of many artists is not so bad, unless for the dancers. The dancers, it's a catastrophe for them, because they face the highest risk, physical risk, low demand, and so on and so forth. But why is this situation relatively better? Because I spoke about the use of the artist in the schools, in the hospitals, in the urban design, and everywhere. Therefore, if I can speak like that, maybe you will not like this expression, some new markets appear for them. Which will create a problem, because they can say, but we are instrumentalized. You are no more musician, but you are a social worker in the hospital that play music to reduce the stress of the children, which is very well socially, but artistically, maybe it's not very interesting for me. It's a kind of debate that we have everywhere right now in the world. But I have to tell you something, that even if the remuneration is relatively better than it used to be maybe 40 or 50 years ago, their access to the social services and the pensions is still very, very bad. It's still very, very bad. The fact that they are underpaid is no more the most relevant criterion. The access to social service and to pension is bad. The third part, I come to the third part. Okay. Therefore, I don't speak about the museum. Okay. Then, what I would like to tell you is that when we try to understand how we can have a sustainable artistic ecosystem or cultural ecosystem, we have to care about one thing. More and more people are accessing to the global flows. More and more local flows are fragile. If the financial resources are dragged by the global level, the skills, the talents, the references are produced by the local level. Then we have to connect both. And how can we connect both? We have to connect these both types of flow, the global and the local, by making creative place, by valorizing local flavors, by clustering intrinsic and instrumental benefits, and by considering governments as brokers. Here I have 4 slides, but I have no time to make the slides. I will just take maybe the 2 first one, or the first one. Okay, the expression making creative place, I have to tell you, it's a very famous expression now. It has been invented in 2012 by the National Endowment for Arts in the US. And it means that if we really want to potentialize the effect of the arts, not only for the market, but for the development, which is different. It means for the quality of life, for everything. We have absolutely to make each territory creative. It can be a city, it can be a metropolis, it can be a rural area. Okay. And make a city creative, it's not only make a city attractive, because make a city attractive, it's only to attract the famous people that are better, more, that are, well, when we speak, honestly, when we speak about attractivity of the city, we speak about very well-educated people. Huh? The people who say that don't speak about the immigrants. It has to be clear. Okay. But we have not only to marketing the city, we have really to engage the local people around the artistic project. And to make them cross the references they can have from the global flows with the experience that they can have with the local flows. Okay, after I put a lot of things, I just want to give you another small example. The issue of festivals, because it's a very important trend in Europe. We have a lot of festivals in Europe. I don't speak precisely about Slovenia. Honestly, I don't know enough to speak about the football game, if you want, but not this aspect. When we look at the festival, we know that the festivals were very, very buoyant at the time and attract a lot of visitors. But it was a problem on the conflict with the local people, because sometimes the local visitors did not benefit from the festival. Then what we try to do, and you have a lot of examples for that, it is to say to the organizer of the festival, okay, you are there, you come every year, maybe we subsidize you, but you are going to organize permanent activities all along the year. I know a city in Europe, for example, where it starts with a festival of music 3 weeks a year, and now you have schools of music all along the year, workshop of music, and even enterprise that fabric, that manufacture in music instruments. And the last point, for maybe I will not go further, it is what we call creative tourism here. I just want, because I didn't speak too much about tourism, but I know that for many people it is the alpha and omega maybe of cultural activities. When we speak about creative tourism, what we mean that we stress that there exists some tourists that want to not only to visit monuments, but really to connect with the people and live with the local people. And this exchange, naturally, between local residents and outward people, in a sense, can be very useful too. because even if we are obliged to organize the cultural policy at the local level and with the local government, it has not naturally to be a closed policy. That would be terrible. Then I have other the slides, but I will stop there. It's a pity because on the next one I speak about wine, but I am sorry. Okay. Thank you for your attention because I believe that I have to stop.
Really, because you showed us also with all these informations that are behind how complex is actually the field, going through the history of cultural economics, how it started at the beginning, and how complex it is at the moment, in the sense that we have received, also for me, also new informations on how the shift was between the beginning, I mean, how artists were actually promoted in the market, and now the shift is going through education first, and then creativity. So before, of course, I have questions myself. I don't know if somebody from the crowd is interested to make any question to Professor Greff, some deepenings or some other specific topics.
Concerning the fact that yeah, so you distinguish two different kind of creativities. I mean, two flux of economy related to creativities. One that comes from outside, as we can, I don't know, say tourism, yeah, to simplify, and one that's internal, that is able to create better human qualities in one community for which that community can be more productive somehow at the end. So it's quite easy probably to quantify the fluxes of tourists, but are there any instruments to understand how an investment in internal, so you called probably instrumental benefits, if I remember, yeah, the term. So are there any possibility to measure how investment in this kind of development can really evaluate it, and so to see if that kind of investment was meaningful or not to create conditions for internal development of that community?
Yes, these types of measures exist. The OECD did a lot on that, the European Union too, but it is very difficult because it's very easy to see it. For example, you take the young boys that go 2 hours a week in the workshop in the museum, and those who don't go, and you can see at the end of the year if there is a difference in the results, or in the skills of the, okay, the same for other things. But the problem is very often that art is not the only factor that may drive to this result. You can say, okay, I have a benefit at the end. The level of the skills has increased. Or maybe the rate of the people who have Alzheimer will be lower at the age of 70 or 75 or things like that. But after, to say that it is exactly the result of a specific relationship between the artistic activity and the health or the educational result, it's more difficult. But it exists. It exists. We have this kind of measure. But I have to say that it is very difficult. But it exists in the literature. Mainly the OECD has done a lot because on the, they did a lot of comparison. I don't know if Slovenia was inside or not, the comparison on the performance of the educational system. And they try to assess the effect of those who follow artistic activities by opposition to those who don't follow artistic activity. But after, the problem is to know what is the role. For example, we know that those who, I go further, and I'm just, we know that those who follow artistic activities have better results. But after, we know too that those who follow artistic activities come sometimes from family that have a very strong artistic background. Therefore, we can say, what is the determinant factor? Is it the background of the family, or is it the time spent in an artistic workshop? You see?
I have a small question. I'm pretty interested in that. So you said that there is a shift. There was a shift actually from the importance of arts, and now the importance of creativity instead. And this is through education. And in your speech, you were also mentioning several times that this creative process in Asia at the moment is quite clear, much more than in other countries. Yeah. And I've read that the scale of, for example, the educational systems in some countries like Korea and China is higher because they have introduced creative processes inside the schools. Is this the reason?
It's difficult to take it over, but I got answer. But first, I want to maybe to correct an impression. I have no time, therefore I took the example of education. But I can take another example. I can take the example of prisons, prisoners, for example. We know that it's what we do in my country for the big museum. We know that when some prisoner enter in the prison, we must as soon think to the time they will go out. Maybe 5 years after, 10 years after, and when they will have no more family or no more social links and things like that. Therefore, we use the artistic activities, mainly literature and drawings, I have to say, if I go on music sometimes, but it's more difficult already. You use these artistic activities to maintain a kind of self-confidence of people in themselves, in order that it will not give them a job when they go out. Well, maybe, I don't know, but it's not very frequent, but it happens. But this to show to you that the instrumental, what we call the instrumental dimension, is not only on education. It may be on hospitals, it may be on search of employment, job search, for example, for the people that are unemployed, and mainly the long-term unemployed people. And it may be like a prisoner. Therefore, for your answer, about China, I did not understand.
China, the Asian supremacy, let's call it, in the sense that they are much more aware on this creative process than in other countries.
But there is a problem in China, not only in China, in Asia. It is that maybe you know that the word arts did not exist in the Asian languages. And for example, in Japan, the word arts has appeared after the Meiji Revolution, only when there was the opening of the country, because the arts were totally integrated in the current life, totally integrated. And this explained I didn't speak about crafts. It is on the slides. You will find them if you are on internet. But this explains a lot of things. Okay. Therefore, they have always had a more integrated vision. I should not say of art, but of the artistic activities in connection with education. They have not this system. I cannot speak for Slovenia, but I can speak for a little more for Italy and much more for France or Spain and UK. When we have, in fact, it's the heritage of the Romanticism in a sense, we have created a system of arts that was no more the system that was existing before the 19th century, in a sense. It was a progressive creation. But we designed a very strong, well, very strong, it was fragile, but very formal system of arts, with schools, with academies, with national institutions, and so on and so forth. And naturally, I don't say that the artists were prisoners of the system, because they have not, it would be so stupid. But the view was focused on that system. And what changed in the European countries, it is the fact that we consider that no, we have no reason to consider that arts belong only to one sector, has to be produced only in the same place and delivered in the same places. But I think that you're right, in Asia, there was not the same conflict. But in Asia, there was certainly another thing that we had. It is the difference of wealth between the people, too.
I ask one question there, and then I will give you the...
Yes, the current economic crisis actually calls for radical rethinking of the role of economy and social sciences. They were actually blamed that social sciences and economy have elaborated very complex answers to wrong questions. So when the question is wrong, there is a disastrous consequences for the stakeholders. So is economy as a science rethinking its fundamentals and how is changing?
Okay,
What is the future role of economics?
It's a big question. No, I just answer to the end of the question because the beginning we have a discussion. Okay, but you're right. When we summarize economics by saying, and this is where I started by the first remark, as the science, it could be said that, I would not say that, but it could be said that economics is only but the science of the market. And you would not be wrong by saying that. It was not exactly that. At the beginning, economics was the science of the development. Because the main question that we had in the 18th century, it was the starting point. It was, why does Netherlands develop and England does not develop? It was like that. That started the first big treatise of the modern economy. And it was a reflection about the development. But the problem is that we focused on the market, which may be a solution. But we know, too, that the market brings very important solution and creates very significant problems. And probably the economic science is more concentrated on the first aspect than on the second one. We try naturally, it's what we call the market failures. But even the term of market failures, it means that our scope is the market. Okay. I think that you're right. We should have a much wider view and come back maybe to a debate in the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. Economics was not different from politics and philosophy. And the first big book of economics were philosophical books. Therefore, it was very. We should come back more on that. What makes the things difficult today, I think, it's first the fact that the economists don't take enough this way. And the second point is that many contestation of the economics say all the difficulty come from the market, there is no any advantage in a sense. And this is a little the debate that we have. The critique of the neoliberalism today is that if you say market, you are a neoliberal, and if you say neoliberal, you are bad. But, which is maybe true, it's up to you, it's a political judgment after. But you can very well say, okay, I want to see how the system can create a development. What we used to call the expression is disappearing. It's not disappearing, it's captured only by the ecologists. But it is appearing what is a sustainable economy, and then to see what should be the fabric of the regulation inside. But the question should be open. You have a question?
Sorry, another question?
Am I getting you right that actually the problem between GDP and the contribution of culture to the GDP could be also just the problem of definition of the GDP? Should we go rather for an alternative definition like Fitoussi, Amartya Sen, or gross national happiness?
Yes, we can say that. You're totally right. You're totally right. But the problem is that it is still the only system that is operating. Because, there is one country, the Bhutan, famous Bhutan. They invented this accounting and they suppressed it last year or 2 years ago. And then it was a happiness, global, yes, global national happiness. we come back exactly at the point of aesthetics and economics, you know. It's very difficult to, but it's a good way, but it is very difficult to enter benefits that appear everywhere in the same system of assessment. The best would be to need, probably the GDP is not a very significant indicator. And I would agree on that. It's not a very significant indicator. You know, what is the use of the GDP in Europe? What is the use of it? To know if you respect the Treaty of Maastricht or not. It's only, you see the GDP, after you have classification, but this classification, you know, you can make, China is bigger than the second nation of the world, and in 10 years it will be before US, and you can say that, but this is not so interesting. We know that the economic power is fantastic, that's all. But are you right?
Other questions? Sasha.
It's not a question. Since we have a faculty of viticulture and enology, could we see the slide on wine?
No, it's not a slide but it's there. No, I said, the problem is that when we try to connect the global and the local flows, you have naturally to give a very strong flavor to the local flow. And you have to come back to what was said before, in a sense. You have really to see what are the resources that can give you an identity, but an identity not to say I am the best or I am better than the neighbor or so on, but an identity to make the local people converge in a sense, cooperate, and so on and so forth. Therefore, I use two words. The word terroir, it's a French word, but it is used in English. I am sorry, therefore I use it here. Terroir, which is, because it's very significant, the terroir, it's really the type of land that produces that gives a specific wine. Therefore, it's, when we say terroir, if there is a terroir, it means that there is a specificity, in a sense. And I put after that when the vernacular heritage, landscape, music, crafts, and gastronomy. Because very often we speak of vernacular heritage only in terms of architecture, which is normal, totally normal, but you have other vernacular resources, and you have to take them. This was really, I had no time, but I wanted to show you that here, you have to consider that the heritage is not the point of arrival, but the point of departure, in a sense. And that in this point of departure, you have no more to make the distinction between tangible and intangible. This is a very, the UNESCO has created exacerbated this distinction. No, they try to offset this tension, but I think that everything is a game between tangible and intangible. The bottle is tangible, but the wine is intangible.
So thank you very much for this introductory, let's say, lecture to cultural economics. So.
Thank you very much.